Joining me today is our senior data journalist, Ben Walker, to discuss what we can glean from the new English Indices of Deprivation. Ben, this is a really fascinating index. The last one came out in 2019, so it's been a while that we've been waiting for the new one. And they're important, aren't they? Because they inform government policy. For example, the latest Pride in Place policy from the government, which chooses where to direct funding to deprived neighbourhoods, is based on the 2019 ranking.
Where to begin, really, because over the past 6 years, a lot has changed. If you're looking for the most deprived neighbourhood, it stayed the same. And I've done the analysis by ward. So when we think of boundaries, you think MPs represent constituencies, councillors represent wards. But this data is done by something called lower super output area, which means absolutely nothing to most people because it's between 400 houses and 1,000 houses. This data really doesn't tell me much. So I've done it by ward here. And look, if you're looking for the most deprived part of England and Wales, because we don't get the Scotland data yet, it still is this ward called Bloomfield in Blackpool, followed by another part of Blackpool, followed by Great Yarmouth, followed by Middlesbrough, Redcar, Cleveland, Grimsby, Middlesbrough again, Liverpool again, and so on and so forth. The top line data hasn't really changed much over the past 6 years, but you go into the 20th most deprived place, the 30th most deprived place, you're seeing some, I think, quite dramatic changes. Places in London, places, frankly, quite south. When you look at which has seen the biggest increases in deprivation, or rather which has moved up the rankings, the data is pretty surprising because I'm seeing it, and I'm seeing a lot in the south. I'm seeing a lot in what is home counties England, Commuterville, England, around Dartford. You're seeing Dover's town centre, the part which includes the castle, shooting up the rankings for deprivation. Ditto in Enfield, Hackney. It's some quite insane stuff. You have some data as well which talks about the proportion of children living, in households with income deprivation. In 2019, that was around about a quarter of the kids in Tower Hamlets. It's now over a majority. You're talking close to 3/4, definitely 2/3. The thing with this data, though, is health warnings. If you, for instance, live in pretty plush flats, if you live in some pretty decent flats, but because you don't have a garden, you are going to figure, for some reason, high on the deprivation scale. There is some health warnings about that, but there is no doubt when it comes to the indicator on childhood poverty, there's been some clear, dramatic, traumatic increases in child poverty in London, and that shows in the data.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's talk about specific areas. I know you've broken it down by ward, but when we look at it, in those neighbourhood definitions that you so harshly dismissed at the beginning of your explanation, Ben, the most deprived neighbourhood in England is still an area called Jaywick in Clacton. And that was the same place as in 2019, 2015 and 2010. So it does kind of beg the question. I mean, Clacton, of course, is politically interesting because it is Nigel Farage's constituency and has long been this kind of UKIP Brexit Party reform curious place. But I mean, it begs the question of what's the point of doing these rankings if you're identifying these places that are so deprived and it's not changing year by year. I remember speaking to a researcher who's worked on a number of indices like this, and he was making that very point, actually, sort of off the record. He was saying, it's actually depressing to see some of these places don't move up the rankings dramatically, which means that they're just not getting the targeted help that they need to pull themselves out of it. And of course, it means that it becomes a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, doesn't it? Suddenly, Jaywick is the byword for deprivation. Journalists will go there every now and again and say, this is the poorest part of England. And that's a difficult identity for a place to break out of if it's been defined that way again and again. The same with Blackpool as well. So 7 neighbourhoods in Blackpool rank among the top 10 most deprived in England. And that was actually very similar to the last ranking in 2019, where 8 of the 10 most deprived neighbourhoods in England were in Blackpool as well. So Blackpool, again, seems one of these places that stubbornly sits at the bottom of these rankings. It is kind of depressing, isn't it, Ben?
Yeah. Just on Jaywick for a minute, the geography we're using, this study, this work, this piece of work by the ONS uses what those lower super output areas, but they're not the same geographies used by the Pride in Place funding. When
Yeah.
Pride in Place decides what you're getting, they're using something called middle super output areas, which are bigger, which are double these, which are sometimes 2 times, 3 times like that. I'll give you one example. I live in Chester, and we have a part of Chester that is incredibly deprived. It's often in the top 10%, if not top 5%. It's called the Lake, right on the border with Wales. And it's got 4 lower super output areas, and it's got 1 middle super output areas. And 3 of those lower super output areas, not really deprived. 1 of them is very deprived. When you look at the middle output area, it doesn't figure high for funding. It doesn't figure high for deprivation, but it figures in the decision making by the government as to who gets funding. It's not particularly helpful. Just another example as well. In Cheshire, for instance, the town of Ellesmere Port, with high levels of deprivation, got the Pride in Place funding, and another part of Chester got the Pride in Place funding. But Winsford, which has relatively high levels of deprivation across the board, but not in the MSOAs, the middle super output areas, didn't get the funding. What the government uses for Pride in Place sometimes, isn't as targeted as it should be, I think. And as a consequence, Blackpool stays high. Jaywick stays high. Some areas, however, let's not beat around the bush here, have received some substantial investment, maybe as a consequence of devolution. And if you look at the places where deprivation has actually gone down over the past 6 years, one neighbourhood sits out strongly to me as a northerner, and it's Toxteth in Liverpool. This is a place, if you ever go there, its history with the riots. If you ever, you're in a taxi with a Scouser, they always say, when I was younger, I would never ever go to Toxteth. Now you've seen some dramatic changes in living standards there, number of houses being made available again, not houses being built, but houses that, once burnt down, they've been brought back to life. You're seeing deprivation fall there. That is a place that's had a lot of investment, and you're seeing it show up in the data.
Yeah, okay, that's really interesting. And another name of an area that stood out to both of us was Handsworth in Birmingham, which obviously is politically salient. Our reporters went there recently to ask locals about Robert Jenrick's assessment of the place, where he made some controversial comments about not seeing a white face and also described it as a slum. But it has massively risen in deprivation, according to this ranking, since 2019, hasn't it, Ben?
We're looking at thousands of areas right now across England and Wales. And so when I say something is 150th for most deprived, some of you might think, that's actually not quite high. But when you're doing 5,000, 6,000 places, actually it is high. Handsworth in Birmingham, that was I think it was 127th in 2019. Now it's gone up to 15th. This is when you can compare the data. I'll give you another example. Holyhead in Birmingham. There's another Holyhead in Wales. Everywhere's got a place called Holyhead, hasn't there? 205th in 2019, 36th now. And here's something that's really interesting. You don't often think of this. What's notable is urban deprivation is really, I don't want to say it's gone through the roof, but I think it's seen the more dramatic rises. Well, here's something in a part of the world that isn't particularly urbanized, and it's the Isle of Wight. The Isle of Wight is 2 constituencies now. The one portion went Labour, the other portion stayed Tory. And it's interesting to note that the seat that stayed Tory actually has seen some dramatic increases in deprivation. Ryde Southeast, Ryde, the little town that still, I think, does hovercrafts. Never been there. I've only just seen it on Wikipedia just now. That's seen deprivation, or rather its ranking for deprivation. It was 500th for most deprived 6 years ago. It's now 98. Something's gone on there, or something is not going on there, that is seeing deprivation rise so much.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we've got these trends. We've got Liverpool that seems to have done quite well in 6 years. Birmingham seems to have, certain parts of Birmingham seem to have become more deprived. And then another big trend that you pulled out, Ben, was that the south of the country seems to have a disproportionate rise in deprivation, according to this index. Why do you think that is? I mean, is that a result of obsession with the red wall, levelling up policies, this idea that we've forgotten about deprivation in London, decided to focus all of our resources on the north of England, or is it more complicated than that?
As a northerner, I would never agree with that. I'd never ever say that, and I don't think that's right. Actually, I think the truth of the matter is this: if you look beneath the headlines, because right now I'm talking deprivation in totality. I think if you look at housing deprivation, if you look at housing affordability, if you look at people's ability to actually get a pride in place, your own pride in place in the south of England, you are going to struggle. one example is this: the Brighton housing economy has overheated so much that if you want to live in Brighton, you can write that off and you should go further down the beach and live in Worthing or Peacehaven or where is it, Eastbourne or Lewis, and so on and so forth. That's what you're seeing. And this is the kind of deprivation you're seeing, which is that little towns that are not used to becoming the dormitory towns of bigger cities, they are getting the influx of people moving in, trying to make a life there because they can't afford those cities anymore. And I don't think these little towns, these Tory towns, so to speak, that have been so used to being those little towns, are ready, have been remotely ready for this sort of change, this influx of people seeing the South as the future, seeing the South as the place to go, to place to make a living. And well, where are they going to live? Well, it's these towns that aren't ready for them. That's what we're seeing.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And pushing living costs and house prices up in the process of moving out to these towns as well, which we've seen happen in a number of seaside towns too. I mean, I remember in Hastings, the council was on the brink of bankruptcy because of the cost of trying to find temporary accommodation for their own locals who couldn't find housing, because the prices of those properties have been pushed up so much by people coming from places like Brighton and London.
Councils, by and large, are just struggling. Temporary accommodation is one of the biggest drains of a council's resources. Always remember this, that when you think, where does your council tax go? Around about 70% of it across almost every single council in the country doesn't go on the basics, like house building or council houses that plenty of our listeners probably want to see building. 70% of your council tax goes on social care. The care homes to look after Mrs. Muggins, the price of which has been rising through the roof. At the same time as you've got to pay school transport for kids in special needs, paying taxis that, well, what? They can charge whatever they want. Does that make sense? No, it doesn't, but it happens. And at the same time, you're paying B&B prices that I think are above the average just to do the basics, just to get the basics done. You're outsourcing your problem to everyone around you, and councils and the council taxpayer are suffering as a consequence.
Yeah, I'm sure we're going to get a Mrs. Muggins writing in now and defending her position. But Ben, I mean, before we get onto the politics of this and why it's so important politically in the second half, I just wondered, what picture do you think this new index of deprivation paints of modern Britain? What can we learn from it?
Never forget that there is deprivation. You know, it's not the posh South versus the poor North. It never was. It never has been. Let's get that out of our heads. I'll give you another ward, I suppose. Springfield ward in Hackney. More deprived than most, but it's shot up from 750th to 100th. Over the past 6 years, you're seeing a level of deprivation in London. It was always deprived in these parts, but it's got a hell of a lot worse. And at the same time, you're seeing parts of the north where it's always been deprived, staying deprived. What's happened is I think this country has suffered across the board, and it's starting to catch up in Commuterville, in home counties, England, and London, which I think gets written off as always paved with gold because you guys have better infrastructure in terms of trains and not trams. You have all that. Never forget what you have underneath in the underbelly of London, which is frankly a serious deprivation issue that never went away, does exist, and needs to be remembered by politicians the world over.
Let's talk about the two-child benefit cap. That's been a big issue in politics ever since Labour got into government and hasn't removed it. It came into effect in April 2017. So the children born then would be 8 now. And of course, there would be many second and third and, fourth siblings born since then. In the 2019 ranking, this actually shocked me so much that I had to message you and ask if I'd got something wrong. The highest local authority district for children living in income-deprived households, so let's just say highest number of children living in poverty, was in Middlesbrough. And that was 32.7% of children in Middlesbrough were living in those conditions. That's a shocking figure. But in the new ranking that we've just had out, the top local authority district for this was Tower Hamlets in East London at 71.3%. I mean, that's such a shocking rise in terms of just anywhere in the country, the proportion of children who are living in an income-deprived household. I was so surprised by it, I thought I'd completely got it wrong. Ben, have I got it wrong?
No, you haven't got it. You haven't got this wrong. It's not a laughing matter. This isn't good. This isn't good by any stretch. In Tower Hamlets, it was the estimate. Bear in mind, this data sometimes gets reviewed and it gets, rehashed. Always bear that in mind. But this is so dramatic. a change in data that I think you have to take this very, very seriously, a lot seriously than I think others. Tower Hamlets was 27% 6 years ago.
Yeah,
For it
exactly.
to almost triple is silly. We don't know what, and it's the same across other parts of London. You know, you've got Tower Hamlets at the top there. You've got, I think, Brent underneath and Hackney as well. I think what's happened is we are comparing pre-COVID data with post-COVID data.
Yeah.
A lot of places have recovered. I'm going back to where I live, and I'm seeing affluent suburban areas. Yeah, their levels of deprivation have actually gone down by quite a bit. But you're seeing areas, and again, disproportionately urban areas that already had a little bit of deprivation, already were, worse than most, just get a hell of a lot worse. It's almost like, they were already on precarious grounds and they've just fallen through the floor. And you're seeing that in a lot of urban areas. I think the proportion of people who are now starting to claim welfare benefits and in whatever form, we've seen the statistics show it going through the roof, particularly those in work as well. And it just hasn't gone away. And it hasn't gone away. And it's starting to show up in the data in terms of this is poverty. This isn't people being lazy. This is poverty now.
And this is really difficult for the government as well, because they made a pledge that they would reduce child poverty in their first term. They still haven't repealed the 2-child benefit cap. There's supposed to be a child poverty task force reporting on this, but, in what world can they not recommend that the government lifts that cap? We just had Steve Akehurst, the polling analyst, on yesterday's podcast, who found in a new analysis of polling that he'd done that child poverty was actually one of the key things that the government would be rewarded for eliminating in a sort of imagined 2028 election scenario. So clearly it's something that is embedded in the minds of voters. And also, let's not forget, this is a Labour government. People think a Labour government should be the one tackling problems like child poverty, as New Labour did when they were in government. So if the government is always going against that Labour brand, even if you didn't vote Labour, you're still surprised and dismayed to see that it's not delivering on the things that you would expect it to. So I think these are important figures for the government to get its head around.
Absolutely. I'm just seeing that going through that data now that we did charts from Persuasion UK.
Yeah, Steve Akehurst.
Child poverty up. That if that happens, if the government's record is that would be the most punishing metric, followed by crime rates up, followed by energy bills increase, national insurance increase, NHS waiting times. The stuff, the things that the government will be rewarded on would be, yes, child poverty has fallen. The problem is that when you get to the specifics of should we remove the 2-child cap, most Britons are actually against that. And I never like to point fingers. I never like to disparage the voters that I spend, 10 plus years studying now. But I think it comes down to an innuendo. Who has more than 3 kids? Who has more than 4 kids? Who has more than 5 kids? I remember when it was introduced all the way back during the coalition years, and I remember the debate, and it was always, when it was used on the doorstep, when certain campaigners advocated it, it was always wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Who were trying to stop from claiming benefits, and I think that needs realizing or reckoning with the public. I think politicians need to reckon with that and sort of say, if you want to get poverty down, this is the easiest way to do it. No, it shouldn't be a debate on race. It shouldn't be a dog whistle. This is it. Problem is, most voters say, I don't want to do it.
And let's talk about the Conservatives' record as well, because obviously last time we had this ranking was in 2019. So a lot of this is covering the years since Boris Johnson came into government. One of his promises, of course, was to get Brexit done, but his other big mission was to level up the country. And so does the fact that 82% of neighbourhoods that were ranked most deprived in 2019 are still the most deprived this time suggest that levelling up just didn't even make a dent?
It's hard to say. It's hard to say because when you look at the places where the level of deprivation or the score for deprivation has gone down, you can see some areas that were, we in the journalist class regularly wrote up as deprived as can be. I'm thinking Blythe Valley in Northumberland, which was one of the first seats in 2019 to go from Labour to Conservative. You're seeing the level of deprivation in some of those estates, fall by a significant proportion. I'm seeing the Isle of Sheppey on where's that, in Kent, and I'm seeing there the level of deprivation go down a little bit. as well. You're seeing parts of Liverpool that I think were deprived 20, 30, 40 years ago that were really, again, what did I say about Toxteth? Taxi driver said I'd never ever go there, and now they do. You're seeing that fall by a notable number. But it's all relative, isn't it? You're seeing the score go down, but it's all relative. So Toxteth, that place where I talked about, the rank in 2019 was the 14th most deprived. It's now the 73rd most deprived. Okay, it's going down. The score is going down, but it's all relative. It's all relative. Can we blame the government for that? I think we should always blame the government for choosing pride in place funding using geographies that aren't the same as the deprivation geographies. What on earth are they doing?
Yeah, although it's not as bad as the Tories. I think one of their towns funds just went to Doncaster as a whole. So, at least Labour are trying to reach to a neighbourhood level, even if it's not to as granular a level as people need. And then what about reform? We always associate reform's target seats with places that have been left behind, coastal towns, post-industrial towns. Is there a way of sort of mapping this new deprivation index onto the reform curious electoral map?
Always, and this is why you guys employ me, because the Britain Predicts model, which was the most accurate of the 2024 general election. Well, what is it?
But get to the question, Ben. Come on.
When you look at it by ward, which is what my Britain Predicts model is able to do, you do find the areas where Reform are on course to win right now. The level of deprivation is going up on 2019. It's really interesting to note that where the Tories still win, or rather where Reform are in pole position with the Conservatives to win, deprivation is also going up. It's interesting to note that the wards where Labour are just holding on, deprivation is pretty much staying the same. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And when you look at the wards where the Greens are currently forecast to win, and that includes, the current Britain Predicts forecast has the Greens on about 12 seats, okay, parts of Manchester, Bristol, they're winning wards in Reading, Lewis, Herefordshire, Lancashire, and so on and so forth. You actually find deprivation has gone down a bit, actually. It's interesting that where the Greens are scoring hits right now or coming top, the level of deprivation appears to have gone down a little bit. But you just need to bear in mind that areas that are very green friendly, we were just talking about earlier, central London, Hackney, Enfield, places where deprivation went through the roof, Tower Hamlets, where the proportion of kids in child poverty basically has gone up from 27% to 70-something%. Right now, the forecast says they're going to stay Labour. Are they going to stay Labour? Are the politicians there reacting to this reality? Are they already aware of it? How are we actually catching up a bit too late with it? Are the councillors on the ground, they've been talking about it for this long, maybe they're on top of it and maybe they're not going to suffer at the polls. But these sorts of areas, a rude awakening is due, I suppose, if the politicians don't get a handle on it.